I had notes and they disappeared. Today we are going to hear from MountainTrue's AmeriCorps Water Quality Administrator, Grace Fuchs. Grace will be discussing the history of environmental extraction and activism in Appalachia. Grace graduated in 2019 with a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies from Ohio University, where she fell in love with Appalachia and completed her thesis work on the social and environmental impacts of fracking in Appalachia, Ohio. If you are not familiar with MountainTrue as a whole, we are an environmental conservation organization that works regionally, mostly in Western North Carolina, to protect our resilient forests, our clean waters, and healthy communities. Please check out our website to find out more about what we do. You can find us at www.mountaintrue.org. Since this is a webinar, you cannot see or hear you, but you can see and hear us. If you have any questions during the discussion, you can type them into the Q&A box below, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So from here, I will go ahead and hand it over to Grace to get us started.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy you're here with us today. I can just get my, we are at the end of my presentation. We will start at the beginning. All right. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about the history of natural resource extraction and activism in Appalachia. One of the very important questions I feel like we need to answer before we delve in any deeper is, where is Appalachia? Because there's a lot of different answers depending on who you ask. If you look at the political definition, there are these 420 counties that are highlighted here and divided into subregions that are part of the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is a federal agency that was created to provide aid specifically to impoverished Appalachian counties. And here Appalachia extends from New York all the way down to Mississippi. But if you look at where the Appalachian Mountains are, the mountain range actually starts in Georgia and extends all the way up into Canada. And these mountains are almost 500 million years old. They were taller than the Rockies, but have since eroded over time. An additional look at our geography here and some of our geology. There's 4 primary regions of Appalachia with the Piedmont. I'm here in Asheville in the Blue Ridge Mountains. There's the Ridge and Valley, which sandwiches West Virginia and Virginia, and then the Appalachian Plateau, which extends up into Ohio, northern West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. There's also a lot of different cultural definitions of Appalachia. This is based on one geographer's interpretation of the different regions. And so I think most important to highlight here is, this person has decided Appalachia goes up to Maine and includes all of it. It pinpoints that there's Metrolachia, so there is often a perception that Appalachia is just small rural communities where there's a lot of urban centers in this region too. We have Asheville highlighted here, but Pittsburgh, Charlottesville, Roanoke, Harrisburg are other large cities in this space. Appalachia is this very interesting place that's home to incredible biodiversity and is rich with several natural resources. And those resources coexist with environmental exploitation. We're going to talk about logging, coal mining, and fracking, but I'm going to start with highlighting some of Appalachia's biodiversity first. Why is Appalachia so biodiverse? There's 3 primary reasons. During the last ice age, as the glaciers came down from the North Pole, obviously the glaciers did not flatten the Appalachian Mountains. Many species moved south and up in elevation into our mountains, so they wouldn't freeze to death. And that's led to a lot of endemic species being found only in the Appalachian Mountains, and just a wide variety of species being found here. The difference in elevation that we see in the mountains mimics changes in latitude, even though you're going up a mountain, which is a fairly short distance. There's a lot of overlap between southern and northern species in the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Mountains are important for migratory birds. This is often a resting stop, and because of so much of our land being conserved here, it's important as a rest point for those birds. We have deep river gorges, which stay fairly stable climate-wise around the year. And parts of the mountains are actually designated as temperate rainforest, with an average annual rainfall of about 90 inches of rain. And the average temperature throughout the year really only fluctuates between 40 and 60 degrees. So this stability and the abundance of water also helps provide for a lot of different species. We're going to talk about some of our different animal groups here. Appalachia is home, Appalachian rivers specifically, are home to over 4,200 different species of insects. A lot of these are bugs that we will find on land, like dragonfly larvae, for instance. But most of these bugs start in their larval stage in the waters, and eventually will undergo metamorphosis, grow wings, and live the rest of their lives out on land. Macroinvertebrates, so like the bugs you see here, along with mussels, clams, and crayfish, are important bioindicators. So as we study what's present in our streams, we can interpret information about the overall health of the ecosystem. The Appalachian Mountains are also a biodiversity hotspot for salamanders. Here we have eastern hellbender pictured with its egg clutch. Hellbenders can grow over to 2 feet long and are a native giant salamander. And the Great Smoky Mountains National Park alone is home to over 30 different species of salamander, and there's many other species that occur throughout the rest of the mountain range. We're also home to a lot of different snail species. People have discovered over 260 land snail species. Pictured here is the queen crater snail, which is the largest land snail found in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Again, going back to our aquatic ecosystems, our rivers here are really a wealth of life. The rivers in the Appalachians are home to over half of all freshwater species found in North America. So that means we have over 400 different species in this region. Pictured here are the lake sturgeon. This is a baby one. Lake sturgeon can grow to over 4 feet long. We have Appalachian brook trout, which is our native trout species in this area. And we're home to a lot of different darters and minnow species as well. One of the most colorful being the candy darter. In addition, there's over 600 mussel and aquatic snail species, and an additional 250 species of crayfish found in this area. Some crayfish species only are found in certain creeks, and so we have a lot of rare species that are endemic to this area, meaning that they're not found outside of the Appalachian Mountains. We also have great fungal biodiversity. There's over 2,300 species that have been identified, and there's new species are being identified every single day. Here's a picture of velvetfoot. We have plenty of plant biodiversity as well. There's over 100 native tree species, 1,400 other flowering species, and 500 moss and fern species. Because of the change in elevation, we're allowed to have a lot of different species thrive in a small area. Hemlocks pictured here are typically found near rivers and in acetic coves, but on the other hand, we have spruce fir trees that are only found at elevations above 5,000 feet. We have Ohio spiderwort here as one of our spring and summer wildflowers, ramps, which are an edible plant found in Appalachia, also called wild onions, and ginseng has been important to the region, both economically and ecologically for several years. It's highly valued and is now protected due to overharvesting. So all of this wonderful biodiversity coexists with extreme environmental extraction. And so Appalachia is kind of contradictory in the fact that it's home to all of this biodiversity and increasingly ecotourism, while also sustaining the impacts of logging, fracking, and coal mining. We're going to start our talk off with fracking, and fracking is a way to extract oil and natural gas from the ground. On the right there, you see the traditional oil well, which is vertical, up and down. You drill down, you hit a gas or oil reservoir, and the material pumps straight back up. Fracking, which is short for hydraulic fracturing, allows oil and gas companies to drill deeper and also horizontally to reach different shale gas. In Appalachia, the deeper deposits are found in shale formations, and this involves injecting a highly pressurized chemical mixture underneath the ground to fracture it and allow the natural gas or oil to be extracted and pumped back upwards. There's a lot of potential pathway contamination for fracking. This is just looking at the water impacts. Obviously, salinization, if you draw water from an aquifer, it becomes more and more concentrated with salt. The remaining water that's left, that's a potential issue. The spilling of the waste fluid that is produced by this process can either be spilled directly onto the ground at the well site or in transport to a different storage location. Additionally, there's always the potential for cracks to occur in the oil well itself and have the gas or oil migrate into the aquifer or just outside of the well. And the waste fluid is often injected back underneath the ground, and that can face the same migration problems. So there's not only environmental impacts from building and extracting the well, the oil and natural gas at the well site, but there's problems associated with the injection wells that receive the waste and methane and other air pollutants being released into the air during the extraction or intentionally lit on fire and flared off. Coal mining has been going on historically in Appalachia for a very long time and is often associated with the region and its poverty. Lots of folks, I think, picture, this old coal miner in this black and white photo covered in soot, but underground coal mining still occurs, though rarely today. And that's because what used to employ thousands of underground miners has been mechanized and has greatly reduced the labor need and the labor costs. This mechanization was essentially done in the industry by the 1970s and greatly reduced the need for actual coal miners and greatly increased the surface area of coal that could be mined. For this pictured here, this machine is the Big Muskie bucket. It was used for surface mining in southeastern Ohio. It was built in 1969 for a cost of $25 million. In today's dollars, that would be almost $200 million. And you see this contraption, it has this bucket attached at the end. This bucket is shown in a photo on the right and is now a roadside attraction in Appalachian, Ohio, you have a couple people there for scale. This bucket alone can move 220 cubic yards of land, which is about the size of 2 Greyhound buses. When this was opened as a roadside attraction, the local high school band played, and the entire band fit in the Big Muskie bucket. This really scaled up coal production while reducing the actual laborers needed, and caused much more environmental destruction just because of the sheer amount of earth that was moved. As the easy to access coal was removed, companies were looking to reach for harder to reach and coal deposits that were further underneath the ground. And so mountaintop removal was a primary method to do that, which essentially this photo on the right shows that a lot of dynamite is put in the ground and the top of the mountain is blown off. And that earth is generally filled in just to the valley nearest the mountain. So it creates this large flat piece of land where there used to be a lot of topographic variation. At least 500 mountaintops in Appalachia have been leveled this way. And the area that has been removed or dumped into the valley is roughly the size of the state of Delaware. So that's over 1.5 million acres of land. This comes at a great cost to public health due to the coal dust and other air pollutants that are released when you blow up a mountain. And particularly the tri-state area of Eastern Kentucky, Southern West Virginia, and Western Virginia have really been hit by this issue. Logging is the most predominant extractive industry here in Appalachia, both in our Appalachian counties and in the rest of the state, due to our great timber resources here. And there's essentially 2 different methods of logging: clear cutting, which just cuts down everything in a certain area. And this is a big concern because it exposes the soil, and without plant or tree roots to hold the soil in place, a lot of erosion happens very quickly. There are lots of different selective cutting methods, which just means that you're cutting some of the trees, either of a specific age or a specific species or some other criteria, so you leave part of the landscape intact. And this is generally less intrusive, especially as far as erosion, because the plant material is still there to hold the soil in place. Timber has been an industry present historically. Again, this photo of clear cutting was taken near Mount Mitchell in the 1920s. And the vast clear cutting, especially in the eastern half of the US, really contributed to the creation of the US Forest Service in the early 1900s, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was a program as part of FDR's New Deal during the Great Depression, included people that particularly labored and replanted trees in previously logged areas. So I know, at least in Ohio, parts of Wayne National Forest, our only national forest in Ohio, almost all of that land that is now covered in 80-year-old trees, all those trees were basically planted in the 1930s. There's very little old growth left in the state. Logging is still going on today, and these are some stats about the amount of logging in North Carolina. Deforestation is a significant contributor to climate change due to the amount of carbon dioxide released into the air when you cut down trees, as well as the transportation of the lumber and the processing of the lumber. In North Carolina, it is the 3rd biggest factor as far as carbon dioxide releasing. So Appalachia has a strong activist history. with regards to the environment and also with regards to labor, the first coal mining unions were formed in Appalachian counties. And this activism throughout history has a couple common themes of being focused on the health and well-being of the community, as well as the environment. And these activist campaigns are often led by women who would be considered unlikely activists, where they might not necessarily have formal training or be a scientist, but they're motivated by the desire to protect their homeland and their family members and the overall community well-being. That's certainly not true for everyone, but that is a pattern that has come up a lot. So for an example of coal mining activism, I wanted to share the story of Coal River Mountain Watch and Marsh Creek Elementary. Marsh Creek Elementary is located in Rock Creek, West Virginia, and this school has been here since the 1940s. And Massey Energy has done coal mining as well as toxic storage of mining waste in proximity to the school. The school, if you can see on our map here, is located 400 yards, so a mere 4 football fields in length, below a 400-foot dam that stores almost 3 billion gallons of coal sludge. So this is very polluted water that is created as part of the coal mining and coal processing process. And there's been other dam failures in Appalachia that have caused severe flooding and loss of life. If this dam were to burst, it would flood everything essentially in a 30-mile radius, and there would not be time to evacuate the school with it being so close. Additionally, the school is a mere 150 yards from a coal processing plant that releases a lot of coal dust. So the imminent danger of the dam possibly failing, as well as the present danger of the coal dust and other air pollution, really led to a toxic environment in the school, as far as seepage of pollutants from the dam, as well as the coal dust being released into the air. This is in a small Appalachian community, and people noticed that all of the kids in the school were sick, more so than usually would be, and a lot were developing chronic illnesses like asthma as an impact of this pollution. And so the local community members, along with Coal River Mountain Watch, were really advocating the state to do environmental testing, to come up with a plan for possible evacuation if the dam were to fail, and they weren't really getting a lot of response from the state. So local activists marched to DC in 2006 to raise awareness of this issue. And after years of petitioning and lobbying and direct protest, in 2010, they were able to receive a combination of state and private funding to relocate the school, so that the children and the people of this community weren't exposed to toxins while they were trying to get an education. Another story that I think is really important to tell is actually about the founding of the Western North Carolina Alliance, which MountainTrue emerged out of after a merger with some other environmental nonprofits in 2015. But this is really what started MountainTrue, essentially. There was the fight to protect our public lands in the Nantahala and Pisgah National Forests. The National Forest Management Act of 1976 was a federal law that required the U.S. Forest Service to receive and utilize public input in their forest plan, which mapped out all the activities that were going to occur in our national forests for the next 10 years. The Western North Carolina Alliance was founded in 1982 over concerns about oil and gas extraction coming to their national forest here in Western North Carolina, because they had seen the damage that coal and fracking had done in other Appalachian states. those leases to the Pisgah and Atanahala haven't actually come to fruition, but those leasing, the threat of leasing and development of oil and gas has definitely threatened other national forests in Appalachia, particularly the Wayne in Ohio. So the US Forest Service released their first draft of the forest plan in 1984, I'm sorry, and it had a lot of clear cutting in this plan. There was going to be up to a third of the acreage in Pisgah and Nantahala was going to be clear cut in the next 50 years. And that set off alarm bells for environmental activists and community members that didn't want the negative impacts of logging, of clear cutting specifically, because it's so much more environmentally destructive than other methods of logging to occur. So WNCA trained citizen scientists to go assess timber plots, and they found that the proposed clear cutting sites weren't actually going to be as economically beneficial as the Forest Service had said in their plan, and that they weren't going to be as environmentally sound as far as the US Forest Service said. WNCA petitioned the US Forest Service with its southern basis here in Asheville. They delivered a petition of over 16,000 signatures that wrapped around 4 city blocks in a public parade to the US Forest Service. They commanded the Forest Service to hold public hearings about the forest plans as a way to address the community concerns and let citizens voice their concerns. And when they didn't feel like public opinion was being considered, they appealed the US Forest Service in court. So at first they appealed the southern region, southeast region of the US Forest Service, and a court ruled that the US Forest Service plan was fine. And so WNCA went and appealed directly to the head of the US Forest Service in DC. While all of this was going through the court system, there was a lot of direct activism. In addition to our petitions, there was cut the clear cutting marches and other demonstrations. And the activists here really used sort of a commons environmental ethic, viewing the national forests, which are our public lands, as a commons for everyone to use, and really emphasized that there should be multiple uses of the forests. And so while some community members in the previous years had been against the US Forest Service because they wanted to put on wilderness designations, which a wilderness designation in the US Forest Service would essentially mean that you're leaving the land as it is, you're not allowed to really recreate there or extract timber, but also other forest products like firewood or native and medicinal plants. So it was interesting that a lot of people that were so staunchly against the wilderness designation, because it was a single use, were equally against the clear cutting in the forest plan, because they also saw that as a single use. If you're going to clear cut the entire forest, that means that it's just going to be used for timber. There's not going to be any other woody material left for other people to use. And so WNCA, as well as the concerned community members, really put forth this idea of commons environmentalism, that we need to protect the national forests for multiple uses. So you can fish and hunt and recreate and collect timber and also have the scenic views. It's not just for one use or one group of people to use. It's really for everyone. After a decade in the court system, the head of the US Forest Service ruled in favor of WNCA, and the amount of clear cutting in the US Forest Service plan for Pisgah and Tantahala was cut down to 300 acres, where it was originally going to be a third of the entire public acreage. So that was really their first real victory And that's the reason why so much of our national forests in this region are still protected today. There are a couple concluding thoughts I want to share with everyone. I'm very knowledgeable on this topic, and there are a lot of stories I wanted to share about activism and the history of the region. So if you have follow-up questions or want more resources, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But the 4 big takeaways for me are that the region of Appalachia is often loosely defined and has a different definition based on who you ask. If you look at the cultural aspects or the Appalachian Regional Commission definition or the actual geography of the mountains or the geology of the soil, it depends on how you define it. It's certainly not a monolith. There's a lot of diversity as far as biodiversity, geographic diversity, but there's also, human diversity. It's not just all white. There's rural and urban areas. It's not just all rural. And this place is really rich in natural resources, which on one hand is wonderful because of all this incredible biodiversity that gets to exist here, but that also means that it's under threat from extractive industries and has been a lot in the past. And that threat has really developed a strong ethic of activism throughout the region. And this environmental activism is very deeply connected to people's sense of place and community. It's not just about protecting the woods for the environment's sake. It's about promoting a healthy and sustainable community, whether that's environmental protections, ensuring economic well-being, and public health. I have a couple recommended readings. These are some books that I certainly drew upon for today's presentation and go far more in depth on these issues. That is all I have, and I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has them.
If you have any questions, definitely feel free to put them in the Q&A below or in the chat box if that's easier, and we'd be happy to read them out loud and take those questions that way. So Callie said, what's Western NC Alliance doing today?
The Western North Carolina Alliance is now known as MountainTrue, and MountainTrue focuses on healthy forests and sustainable forests, healthy communities, and clean water. So we do that through a variety of water quality programs. We have public lands programs that focus on conservation and native plant reestablishment and invasive plant removal. We host 4 river keepers that are dedicated to protecting the various rivers of the region, and we focus on urban planning, specifically in Asheville, to foster public health and sustainable communities.
We did have a few comments in chat. We got nice job, keep spreading the knowledge, and then great presentation. Oh. You got a question from Josh Kelly that says, I hear that fracking companies are allowed to discharge fracking fluids into streams. Is that true?
Short answer is yes. Due to the federal energy legislation that was passed in 2005, fracking was one of the few industries that was not held to the same environmental standards as coal mining or timber or other industries. So while it is still not technically legal to discharge directly into streams, it certainly happens. Another way that the fluid is accidentally introduced is by spills or crashes of the trucks transporting the fluid. And there are certainly, you know, companies that don't follow regulations and just discharge directly into streams, but West Virginia, as well as a few other states, actually dry out that waste fluid. It has a lot of salt and other like salty material in it, and use it as road salt in the winter, even though it contains naturally occurring radioactive material. Because the fluid was underneath the ground, it picked up those contaminants when it was pumped back up. So yes, that's a legal use.
So we have a comment. It says, it's hard to believe that that school was only moved out of harm's way in 2010. Great job. And then from Sarah, we have, are there any fracking industries close to Boone?
As far as I know, and I certainly don't pretend to have extensive knowledge, you know, exhaustive knowledge on this issue, the oil and gas shale play, as it's called, is predominantly in West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, and Eastern Ohio. Fracking was, oil and gas extraction has been going on in this country for hundreds of years, but fracking was really seen as a way to increase domestic energy production as a response to the oil crisis in the 70s. So there's been a push to extract this oil and natural gas that is, you know, not as easily reached. So I don't know if there's anything specifically happening in the Boone area. I know that fracking occurs off the coast of North Carolina, but I'm not sure if there's enough viable oil and natural gas resources here that it would be economically feasible or viable for companies to extract here in Western North Carolina.
Looks like in chat, we got a thanks. Well, if there aren't any more questions, oh, there's one. So Deb asks, have there been studies of water quality when the fracking brine has been used to treat roads?
Yes, especially in West Virginia, where the state, it's both legal, but also actively encouraged as a way to reduce the amount of fracking waste material that you have to dispose of. Again, road salt can impair streams under normal circumstances just because it, adds more salt to the fresh water, and not all the aquatic species are able to adapt to that. But the big concern with using the fracking wastewater, water is not the right word, it's a fluid, it's a mixture of so many chemicals, which most companies don't have to legally disclose, is that when it's injected underneath the ground, it picks up naturally occurring radioactive material that's, miles underneath Earth's surface that normally wouldn't see the light of day. So it picks that up, and then that isn't necessarily removed in the processing plant to take the liquid and turn it into salt. So that is definitely the biggest concern. And studies have found that you find this naturally occurring radioactive material now in freshwater surface streams where it wouldn't be otherwise.
Well, if you guys have any more questions, you can feel free to email Grace about them. You can find her information on our website under our staff page. But I want to give a really big thanks to Grace for coming and putting this together and presenting this. And if you want to hear more from us, definitely check out our website. You can sign up for an email list, and we hope to see you there. So thank you for coming, and have a wonderful Thursday.